I changed my talk title this week. After the inauguration, we had a meditation on Wednesday afternoon after that to just sort of bring a sense of lightness and prayerfulness to our intentions around what is ahead for us as a nation and us as individuals. And the title actually comes out of the book that we have been working with in the prosperity class and that I have been working with in this series, All is Provided. It comes out of which book? The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. And in it, the very last chapter, she describes the turning of the tide as a shift where we as a culture, as a world, as a sort of global paradigm will shift from a mindset that's all about scarcity, where there's not enough and more is better, and that's just the way it is. She's saying that this shifting tide is actually a transformation from that scarcity into sufficiency, where we recognize that there is enough, and it's through collaboration and recognition that that prosperity is more than getting stuff, that we'll move into this space of sufficiency where truly sort of all boats are rising on the new tide. And I love that. And I also realize that as I've been sort of sitting with that metaphor all week, that tides are something that, it's how water moves across the planet, right? They're constantly shifting, moving in and out. And depending on your perspective, it might be great that the tide is coming in to nourish all those little critters that are in the tide pools. But if your beach blanket's in the way of it, you might think it's a bad thing, right? So it's all about our perspective, which way that tide is moving. And I have to say that as I'm in Michigan right now, spending some time at my sister's home, just a little bit of chance to get away. And it's a very different energy here, a very different consciousness than in Chicago. We live in a bit of a progressive bubble. In Michigan, folks they're viewing this a little bit differently, maybe even a little bit skeptically, this change that we're seeing. And so what I'm mindful of is that it's really about the consciousness that we bring to this shifting of tides, whether or not we're able to create a world that works for all out of this shift, or whether we will continue to perpetuate the kind of divisiveness and separation that has characterized so much of at least the last year, and more than that, probably the last 4 or 5. So I want to really explore today how it is that we as spiritual beings can really step more fully into the kind of vision where it's love that we're bringing, as John sang about, or it's oneness that we're recognizing, as Kim so beautifully expressed in her prayer just a few moments ago. Yeah. So in Soul of Money, we talked about the sort of 2 paradigms that Lynn Twist is encouraging us to moving into. And that picture, that image of what it is to live in a prosperous world or a prosperous environment, it's very similar to what Eric Butterworth teaches about prosperity. And what I found interesting as I've been sort of moving through those teachings as we're getting ready to move into that book in the class this next week, is that this notion, Eric was never one that was about acquisitiveness or accumulation. His was all about, he never used the word sufficiency in spiritual economics, but essentially that's what he's talking about, that by our consciousness, each of us has the capacity to recognize what we have and what we can bless in our own experience and to build on that, rather than to focus on what we don't have, where there's not enough and how it's going to be too hard for us to get it, right? That's sort of Eric's premise as well. So I want to share with you first, this is an opening paragraph in a chapter that he calls New World Vision. And then I'm going to read it again to you with, instead of talking about prosperity, but talking about oneness. Because in some ways, I think they're exactly the same thing. And in some ways, the law works exactly the same way, regardless of which aspect of sort of material, worldly beingness we're living in. So Butterworth writes, repeatedly, we have stressed that spiritual economics, During the course of this study, we have been engaged in an extensive study of spiritual economics. Repeatedly, we have stressed the point that economic conditions, no matter how dire they appear to be, are in the world out there. What counts for you is how you deal with them in consciousness. When you begin to see things from the high perspective of the ever-presence of God's substance, you will be in the creative flow of abundance, which will bless your life with sustained affluence. right? That's kind of basic unity principles. What we believe, we attract into us. We are magnets for the energy and the consciousness that we hold. Listen to it when we shift the language a little bit and start to talk about politics and hold the concept of oneness as sort of what the heavenly dimension is rather than abundance or prosperity. Repeatedly, we have stressed the point that political conditions, no matter how dire they appear to be, are in the world out there. What counts for you is how you deal with them in consciousness. When you begin to see from the high perspective of the ever-presence of God's substance, you will be in the creative flow of spiritual citizenship, which will bless your life with sustained peace of mind and heart. And it will also go forth from you as a peacemaking influence in the world. So if we can shift out of some of the attachment that we hold to whichever political party needs to be in power and whatever decisions they made to be helping, if we can shift to a space of recognizing that it's all part of a greater whole, then the presence that we bring will move from being agents of that continuing divisiveness into really agents of peacemaking. If we can hold a space of open-heartedness, if we can let go of our judgments and our insistence about how the world has to be the way we see it, we create a sort of break in the paradigm where something new can emerge. And I think that's what we're all called to, you know, however relieved we might feel, or however, I'm trying to think of from the other side of the political paradigm, or however skeptical we might feel about what comes next. Our capacity and our ability to hold that without judgment and be a presence of listening and compassion is going to make all the difference in the effectiveness of the changes that we're able to create in our own lives and in society, right? So the consciousness we hold is going to be the determining factor, not only in our experience of it, but in how it gets expressed in the world. I want to share Buckminster Fuller was kind of a visionary and inventor that wrote a lot back in the 70s. And I want to share a brief passage where he talked about the kind of world that we just call, you know, Lynn Twist calls it sufficiency, living from a paradigm of sufficiency. He called it living from a paradigm of you and me versus you or me. So here's his projection about how that you and me paradigm is going to come together. This is back in the 70s. He was writing it, that at the time it was a realistic expectation that this world of you and me would come about, because at that point there was really enough food in the world. There were enough resources to take care of everyone. The challenge, as he described it, was that all of our structures and systems, politics, government, healthcare, education, economics, and especially how we think about money, had been designed around scarcity, around the belief that there wasn't enough for everyone and that someone was going to be left out. So Bucky predicted it would take 25 to 50 years for those now inaccurate systems and structures built on belief of scarcity to shift into a you and me paradigm, right? Okay, that's been over 40 years ago. So we're getting at the end of his time frame, which I think is perfect, right? We are poised in a position to be able to sort of bring it forth. And here's what he says was going to happen as it came forth. The old stuff is going to crumble. He warned that it might be upsetting, confusing, even cataclysmic, but that when the transformation takes place, a new world will have been born, a world in which we treasure that there is enough, that we steward it wisely, and that we live in a context of sufficiency and prosperity for all. This paradigm of you and me, right? So it's not surprising that as all of these structures that no longer work, because we're recognizing to a greater and greater degree that scarcity isn't the truth of our planetary existence, of our spiritual existence, that abundance is what we really live from. Sufficiency is what we're living into. So it's not surprising that we're seeing as much turmoil as we had. And as we stay focused on the truth of sufficiency, as we stay focused on the truth of oneness, and our ability to call that forth in even small ways in our personal interactions, then we become the agents through which it begins to express more fully on the planet, right? There's biblical justification and sort of rationale for this too. So I want to share with you a story out of the book of Acts. This is after, Jesus is gone. Book of Acts is when the disciples have sort of been unleashed on the world and they're beginning to share the message more widely. It's really the period in which Christianity really begins to take hold in all of the Roman Empire, right? And so the disciples are being called to move beyond their comfort zones, to move into these chaotic, crumbling paradigms and start to bring a new word, a new insight, a new vision into it. And so Peter, he had returned to Joppa after having been preaching around, and he was catching some flack from the folks, the believers that were already sort of a part of the movement, because Peter had been sharing the message with the unclean. He was sharing the message outside of the normal audience that had been taking up the message of Jesus. So as he described why he had made that choice, why he was doing the work in this way, he shared a vision or a dream that he had had. And I want to share that with us because I think it has some relevance for us. He writes, "I was in the city of Joppa praying, and in a trance I saw a vision. There was something like a large sheet coming down from heaven, being lowered by its four corners, and it came close to me." Are you picturing this? Like you're sitting there and this sheet is falling over you from heaven. "As I looked closely, I saw four-footed animals, beasts of prey, reptiles, and birds of the air. I also heard a voice say to me, 'Peter, get up, kill and eat.' But I replied, 'By no means, Lord, for nothing profane or unclean has ever entered my mouth.' But a second time, the voice answered from heaven, 'What God has made clean, you must not call profane. What God has made clean, you must not call profane.' This happened 3 times. Then everything was pulled up again to heaven." All right, so kind of an interesting image, right? So Peter's being shown this image of all these animals sort of being lowered to heaven and told to go and kill them. I don't believe that it was really a message about Peter going out in heaven and creating a menu for himself. I don't think that's what we're talking about at all here. I think what's being asked of Peter and what's being asked of us is that we be willing to look at the judgments we hold about what's clean or profane, what's right or wrong, what's Republican or Democrat, what's progressive or conservative. We be asked to look at the labels that we've been holding, and we be willing to kill those. It's in releasing our own judgments about the world, how the world has got to be, what's going to unfold, how this new paradigm is going to take place, that our hearts can be open enough to start to begin to create loving connections to those who would be on the other side. But as long as we're holding that they're wrong, they're profane, as long as that kind of paradigm is happening, there's no way we're ever going to get to this space of recognizing the kind of oneness where sufficiency is really going to be able to express itself. So I'm going to borrow a practice from Christina here, right? So I'd like you to be thinking about what is it that you've been holding as profane? What beasts of prey and birds and lizards and reptiles and things that spiders that you would rather resist? What have you been judging as wrong or bad that you might be able to open your heart and recognize that, oh, wait a minute, they have a purpose too. That's a part of a greater whole as well. And just go ahead and share some of those in the chat stream if you can. What is it that you've been villainizing? What is it that you've made wrong and bad? And then the corollary to that is, how can we begin to move into a space of being more accepting and open around those kinds of beliefs? Ann Baker, I saw her on earlier. She shared a website that I'm going to share with you and encourage you to check out and maybe even participate in. It's unifyamerica.org. It was made by a guy named Harry Mathan Gottlieb. It's a sort of movement that he's been pondering for more than 25 years. There is no sort of political agenda at all, but it's about bringing together folks in pairs and structuring a conversation that those pairs can have, where even though they're on opposite sides of political divide or completely different perspectives, we move beyond what Gottlieb would call the strategies that have caused so much division, right? It's not about how we're going to fix it. It's about a common desire to fix the stuff that we all want to see fixed. Across the planet, we would like to see less violence, less war, less aggression, right? But at the minute we start to call that gun control, then the barriers go up, right? Then the barriers that need to be killed and knocked down go up. But Gottlieb's perspective is that as we can begin to move into conversations where we're focused on our common desires and not the strategies out of which we think they're going to be solved, that we can begin to bridge the divides that have been so corrosive to our politics, to our culture, to our relationships, to everything these past few years. So I would really, really, really encourage you to check out unifyamerica.org. Consider engaging in one of these conversations, and maybe dig a little bit more deeply into Gottlieb's sort of perspective about how we can create a kind of environment and create new structures that are going to bring forth a world that works for all. And that's just one resource, but just know that as we begin to open our hearts and minds to the ways in which we can begin to connect across the polarities that have been so divisive over these number of years, then I believe that's our work to do, right? I believe that especially now we're standing sort of at the precipice of this new shifting of a tide, and it's not going to change if we stay in the camps that got us here in the first place. It only changes by our willingness to look at the stuff that we hold most dear, that we hold as sacred, and be willing to accept that maybe the stuff that we've said is profane and sinful, that maybe there's some value to the feelings and the desires that lie beneath those as well. Yeah. So I'm going to close before we move into a time of meditation. I want to close with kind of interpretation of the prayer of St. Francis. It's just a little bit adjusted to come from sort of that unity affirmative perspective rather than God grant me. It's about declaring that it's who we are as well, right? So imagine this to be your reality. Imagine this to be the consciousness you hold as we begin to create more accepting, more open dialogue with those who might have differences or whom we may have differences with. I am an instrument of perfect peace. Where there is hatred, I sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. One with the divine, I seek not so much to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. All right, I'm taking it back. We're not going right to meditation because that sparked another little thing I want to share. Because part of how I think we move into these conversations that are more accepting and loving, part of that is to cultivate curiosity, right? Cultivate a real curiosity and interest in the other perspective, right? And that means cultivating a really high level of self-awareness about our own reactivity, right? Because we engage in these conversations, it's very likely that our first reaction is going to be, rather than really listening with empathy, our first reaction is to want to make our point. We're going to want to make our argument. We're going to want to put our side of the story into it, right? And what I'm saying is, when you feel that come up, and you'll feel it rising up as a like, there's an impatience, there's an anxiety, it might even feel a little bit passionate, but it's a passion that misleads us, right? Because in that moment where I want to be is receptive. It's not about being heard. It's not about being loved. It's not about being understood. It's about our first priority in those moments is to be understanding, to seek another perspective, to open our hearts and recognize that, oh, I'm feeling a little defensive here, and I'm going to want to jump in and just dominate this conversation with my role because I want to convince them that they're wrong. It's recognize that impulse and just allow it to sort of subside. Congratulate yourself for recognizing it and let it slip away so you can move back into a space of being receptive, of being understanding, of being empathic, of being compassionate, of being love, rather than desire that I be loved. Yeah. Okay, that's good. Now I'm ready. I've made that point. So, John, if you would set us up for a nice receptive energy to move into meditation, we will be most blessed.
Yes, will do. Thank you for that wonderful message. There's a part in this wonderful song that talks about giving up and sacrificing self. I like to think about it as sacrificing exactly what you just talked about. The false self that thinks it's separate, that thinks it's right, thinks it's better. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. Take my heart, take my life as a living sacrifice. All my dreams and all my plans, God, I place them in your hands. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me. I give myself away. I give myself away so you can use me.
So into this beautiful energy of yielding to our higher selves, the best qualities within us, to our divinity. I invite you to breathe. Breathe deeply, for it's in these quiet moments when that power is most accessible, when we can feel it most palpably, and we can have the greatest clarity about how to proceed in our lives. And so, dear Spirit, in this moment, we ask that any obstacle to being fully available to divine love, to perfect guidance, to peacemaking, any obstacle to that fall away. If it's a thought pattern, if it's a habit, if it's a false belief, dissolve those in me now. I let them fall away so that my light might shine most brightly. Each of us has the capacity to be a presence for God's love in every situation. To know that we are being divinely guided, breath by breath, word by word, action by action, to bring forth a world that is about you and me. To let go of any sense of competition or acquisition. Move into a space of allowing Spirit to guide me into collaborative relationships, fueled by love and a desire for the greatest good possible. In the quiet now, God, as false beliefs dissolve, we simply allow the Spirit of the Divine to speak to us about what's ours to do and how we might accomplish it most effectively in the silence. Gently now we return our attention to the time and place, to the sounds and sights around us and before us. And as we bring this time of meditation to a close, we remember our oneness with God and with all things. As you open your eyes, I invite you to just look over the faces you see on the screen and recognize each of them as a child of God. Know that we are connected, not just virtually, but spiritually as well. And that those connections extend beyond us to all those whom our lives touch, and indeed to all the world. So it is, and so we let it be. We are one. Amen. Hey, thanks for watching this YouTube video. If Unity's message of positive spiritual living resonates with you, I hope you'll subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date on other lessons as we post them. Also, if you're able to support us financially in the work that we do in the world, please check below for contact information. You can visit our website, find more about what programming we offer, as well as how to give. Blessings.